Wow, thank you for that generous introduction. That's really something to live up to, and I hope I do. And at the very least, I hope I don't scare you. I know we're all a bit sensitive today, and will be for some time to come, I hope. So this is a truncated version, I'll say. This talk does figure into the book that I'm working on, Contemporary Art and the Drive to Waste, but this is a kind of truncated argument for an article that just came out in Postmodern Culture, and it's a special issue on resource aesthetics. And so this is the argument that I put forward in that article. And so it tracks the intersection of waste and resources. Hang on, I'm just going to start my stopwatch. So what I see from art, and I can talk a little bit more about that, but I want to kind of launch into the argument proper. But we're in a moment when what counts as waste itself is being called into question. And so what used to count as waste is now seen as a resource, while at the same time other kinds of waste, such as carbon emissions, are often denied a proper form of accounting and accountability. And so we find ourselves in this very ambivalent position of coping with statements like we see here from the multinational corporation HSBC. This appears to be, so it says here in the bottom left, in the future there will be no difference between waste and energy. So of course this seems to be a kind of ecologically inclined statement about sustainable forms of energy. But it actually, to my mind, speaks volumes about the extent to which energy accumulation and the prohibition to waste are coextensive facets of profit making. So what strikes me as well is that this condition defines an ideal future. So I want to argue that efforts to recuperate the ecological damage of industrial waste as a profitable resource can obscure the broader procedures by which bodies, substances, and desires are yielded as energetic resources in an economic model of indefinite expansion. I'll come to that. So recent decades have seen a preoccupation with the return of waste into the economy, particularly through the dicta of the 4 Rs: reduce, reuse, recycle, regulate. The cultural theorist Gay Hawkins astutely summarizes this predicament in her Deleuzian reading of contemporary waste management. So she explains, in the past, garbage was handled through practices of elimination and expulsion that could be understood as spatial acts of passing from one side of a boundary to another in ways that produce and perpetuate the cleanliness and order of the subject and society more broadly. And she says the elimination model reached its apex in the post-war era with the rise of disposability culture, when commodities were produced with a view to quick and easy discard. However, she says the disposability, that kind of disposability, any kind of disposability now is a technical and spatial fantasy. Not only is the prospect of waste disappearing a logical impossibility, but waste is also increasingly visible. Moreover, the politicization of environmental responsibility charges waste with a new moral valence, whereby waste is never simply eliminated, but rather enters into a reorganized set of relations in connection with the subject and with social space more broadly. So an intensification of contact with waste. Now, I'm happy to do this talk today because it was actually, I was here 2 years ago and I saw Michael Braungart present at the Lunchtime Colloquium. And so Michael Braungart is a renowned chemist, founder of the EPA, Environmental Protection Encouragement Agency, former Greenpeace activist. And he and his co-author, William McDonough, wrote this really impressive, innovative book called Cradle to Cradle, Remaking the Way We Make Things. And so he suggests that efforts of industries to implement the 4 Rs have proved misguided from the start. So Braungart and McDonough propose a major overhaul of the systemic relationship between resources and consumer products. The book outlines a biomimetic model of resource circulation. So they wage substantive critiques of sustainability. Among them, the fact that most efforts to recycle have actually led to a downcycling of materials, by which they lose both use value and exchange value. The downcycling of materials like plastics, metals, and chemicals can increase environmental contamination because of the widening dissemination of downgraded materials. So the cradle-to-cradle model relies on a principle of circulating nutrients rather than matter per se. So they suggest that since the Industrial Revolution, the resource industry has developed two metabolic systems, the biosphere and the technosphere. The biosphere functions on a principle of zero waste, which is to say that in nature, all spoilage turns into primary nutrients, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and this is reabsorbed by the soil and its microorganisms. By contrast, the processes of extracting, altering, or synthesizing substances from the Earth's crust generate new material flows of industrial mass that are toxic to the soil and just can't be broken down. And in fact, these new materials were designed for ever greater flexibility and durability in some cases and built-in obsolescence in others, though only with a view to diminishing use value, not proper biodegradation. So they offer the designation of the technosphere for this circulatory system of new flows, and characterize that metabolic system as cradle to grave to signal this unidirectionality of new substances. So the book offers a number of solutions to the problem of the cradle to grave metabolism, like new chemical designs that respect the distinction between the biosphere and the technosphere. They propose, for example, nutritious biological textiles, or a synthetic commercial carpeting with a durable bottom and detachable top that could be upcycled for its technical nutrients. And the book itself, and this is what's so kind of impressive about it, the book is printed on a prototype of a synthetic plastic paper that's waterproof, durable, and could be potentially, this is the kind of offering up, it could be recycled for its technical nutrients. More than offering design solutions, though, the book proposes a new exchange infrastructure by which technical nutrients could be recovered and upcycled. So, for example, in order for the cycles of the technosphere to succeed, a product of service concept would have to be implemented. So instead of products being bought, owned, and disposed of, technically nutritious products like cars, televisions, carpets, computers, refrigerators would be reconceived as services rented for a defined user period. And I'm quoting them now. They say, under this scenario, people could indulge their hunger for new products as often as they wish, and industry could encourage them to do so with impunity, knowing that both sides are supporting the technical metabolism in the process. Automobile manufacturers would want people to turn in their old cars in order to regain valuable industrial nutrients. So this is their critique of sustainability. They don't isolate consumption as the problem. Consumption is not an issue here. And to my mind, this is what's actually quite innovative about it, or at least was at the moment that book arrived. But it's both the problem and the solution. Here's the dilemma of waste and its relationship to the resource paradigm. The authors can't conceive of the technosphere's metabolism without also invoking a major economic reconfiguration from a product consumer-based exchange to a highly regulated economy of temporary use and recovery, in which the use of objects is nested within limited exchange contracts. In other words, to advocate for a cradle-to-cradle metabolism, the authors undertake a shift in voice from a practical account of the capacities of post-industrial design to a utopian vision of an economy based on nourishment, richness, amoral consumption, an implicit will to have a balanced exchange, and a generous outpour of energies that would override the terms of exchange for profit model. This all sounds good. Now, the limits of the vision, however, can be in its application in the northern Chinese village of Wangbaiyu in Bengji province. In partnership with Deng Nan, the daughter of former Chinese statesman Deng Xiaoping, William McDonough's architectural firm was commissioned to implement the principles and designs of Cradle to Cradle and transform Wangbaiyu from an agriculture-reliant village into an eco-village. The village was organized to be a model for the Chinese government's more ambitious goal of centralizing rural communities, seizing farmland, and moving over half of its 800 million peasants to the cities. The firm planned to relocate disparate farm plots to a central area where homes would be built of straw and pressed earth and rigged with solar panels and other energy conversion technologies. The local residents were encouraged to exchange their current homes and land, crucially their land, for one of the centralized eco-houses. So by 2006, 42 of the planned 200 houses had been built, but none were occupied, despite government pressures on locals. Furthermore, the eco-village functioned primarily as a private enterprise, having been funded mainly by the village chief, with only a fraction of the endeavor supported by the Chinese government. Not only were residents of the village unable to afford the cost of the eco-village housing, but they saw no practical benefits to changing their livelihood in agriculture for a centralized eco-communal lifestyle. So McDonough's experimental village demonstrates the way that the techno-utopianism of a zero-waste ecological model works at cross purposes with historical forms of sustainability, like decentralized rural agriculture, even though it attempts to lower the cost of energy. In effect, Wangbaiyu remained a stalemated project because it could not intervene into the prevailing assemblage of labor or yield an investment of human energies to animate or support its functioning. Moreover, the inhabitants' resistance was due in no small part to the fact that the eco-village would have deprived them of land, a value which would keep giving in perpetuity. So if waste is incorporated into global systems of economic circulation, and if efforts to repattern those systems to contain or eliminate both biological and industrial wastes are thwarted because they cannot channel the invisible energies that power economic growth, then the question arises, what is the source of these energies? How can the economy's energies be understood in relation to systemic imbalances, particularly in the depletion of bodies for the expansion and growth of global capital? To answer these questions, we might consider contemporary art's preoccupation with waste and forms of energy depletion and expenditure. So I'm going to talk about three of these and just kind of run through how they imagine this scenario. So first, Thomas Hirschhorn's installation, Jumbo Spoons and Big Cake. This is a poignant example of a global economy that is at once a wastescape, as Gay Hawkins defines it, and at the same time a restricted system that thrives on human deprivation. Moreover, Jumbo Spoons and Big Cake conveys a suffering corporeal condition precisely through the use of complex industrial materials. The construction orbits around a world cake, set on a wood plank frame and covered with media images taped to cardboard frames depicting global resources, food, water, and energy, and the multitudes of people who depend on them. Each slice is wrapped tightly in colored plastic and weighted down by chains of buckets that are poised to catch every last crumb and drop. The big cake is a figuration of wealth, but it's also an image of penury, a limited resource from which everyone must draw to survive. Books about global resources and the world's destitute are chained to the central armature so that titles spring forward from a tangle of images and materials. And I'm not sure you can see that, but There are all these books that are kind of attached on the side there. Among them, just some of the titles. The Economics of the Labor Market, Hungry Ghosts, China's Secret Famine, The African Poor, A History, Your Money or Your Life, The Tyranny of Global Finance, The Rwanda Crisis, A History of Genocide. In addition, 4 monitors sit on top of the cake, airing documentary footage of war, food, cooking, and labor. Spreading foil appendages attach the cake to what you see on the right, 12 altars, each featuring a novelty spoon made of foil and dedicated to a failed utopia. So there are 12 of these. There's Mies van der Rohe, the 1937 Nazi degenerate art show, Malevich, Rosa Luxemburg, guns, fashion, the moon, Rolex Swiss watches, the Chicago Bulls, Nietzsche, a city, Venice, and a country, China. Like the big cake, these altars feature information, images, and literature that articulate the global vision of each utopia. The spoons appear to be dipped in blood, which pools at the bottom of each altar. As Hirschhorn puts it, I want to make a new work about the world condition, the world state. The world state is about the need to eat or the possibility of not eating. The art historian and critic Benjamin Buchloh praises Hirschhorn's pavilions, altars, constructions, and monuments for their alternative spatial demarcations that integrate themselves and thus mimetically follow the systems of global exchange. So the containers and wrapping materials in which objects have been packed, shipped, and distributed. They are composed of the traces of the global system of production, now posited as waste. In other words, Hirschhorn represents global capitalism in an excremental phase, precisely as a waste system, or rather a system in the process of wasting itself. Waste here is not a homogeneous base matter sedimented at the endpoint of industrial processing. Instead, the installation is interpenetrated by flexible and enduring substances that appear as disposed materials: aluminum, nylon, adhesives, plastics. Waste is continuous with the economy of the world state and cannot be eliminated from it because it has been so completely incorporated. As Buchloh describes, Hirschhorn creates a mechanomorphic carnality that fuses derma and techne and extends into tentacles of monstrous hypertrophic growth. That's not scary. Buchloh's description derives from Felix Guattari's exegesis on machinic heterogenesis in Chaosmosis. Guattari describes how technology grounds itself in living machinic systems in ways that are axiological, gathering and patterning social collectivity, semiotic relations, bodies, and desires. Ultimately, he outlines how the world is entirely mediated by and through an apparatus of machinic systems that function autopoietically, though this apparatus deploys itself in different registers of alterity. Hirschhorn's treatment of the global resource economy links the ideologies of the world state to material substances and a precarious corporeal metabolism in which human bodies are bound up in procedures of diminishing returns of energy. From this perspective, then, it becomes possible to see how Braungart and McDonough's technological solution to waste abuts a system of capitalist homogeneity that subsumes its ecological intentions into an economic instrument that absorbs and deploys human energies in order to expand indefinitely. The model does not ask where the infrastructure of upcycling will draw its energy, nor, crucially, whether this energy will require another form of labor power that may potentially entail new types of waste, or what or whose energy would this infrastructure be nourished. By Frederick Jameson's description in Representing Capital, the political causality of technological change is not the ingenuity of inventors, but rather labor unrest itself. In response to worker demands for higher wages and better working conditions, the capitalist introduces new machinery. hence the contradiction. While the progress of capitalism produces ever greater misery for workers, class struggle is responsible for the greater productivity of capitalism. So Jameson proposes unemployment as the primary condition through which to understand the paradoxical energy system of the economy. Not only is global unemployment structurally inseparable from the accumulation and expansion of capitalism, it is a state of fundamental dysfunction, misery, and idleness on which the system relies. Unemployment flattens out, and I'm quoting him here, multiple situations of naked life in all the metaphysical senses in which the sheer biological temporality of existences without activity and without production can be interpreted. What better definition of waste than this state of dysfunctionality that produces a cross-section of beings, confines them to corporeal existence, and binds them to its own degenerating materials? This means that even an ecologically sound proposal to upcycle products through a successful recirculation and management of nutrients is on a continuum with a larger system, an assemblage that absorbs all sources of energy for the purposes of its own expansion, while relying on a state of impoverishment that appears on a register seemingly unrelated to planetary health, unemployment. And here's Jameson's intervention of understanding unemployment in global terms. So he says those massive populations around the world who have, as it were, dropped out of history, who have been deliberately excluded from the modernizing projects of first world capitalism and written off as hopeless or terminal cases, the subjects of so-called failed states, a new and self-serving pseudo-concept, or of ecological disaster, or of old-fashioned survivals of allegedly immemorial, archaic ethnic hatreds. Now, given Jameson's commentary, we might also see Hirschhorn's big cake, how that enacts global capital's instrumentalization of the zero waste paradigm as the dispersal of the condition of unemployment across people, objects, and substances that are fused together within the system's absorption and wasting of life, even as it spreads and disseminates its impoverished biotechno-materiality. Now, where Hirschhorn synthesizes the contradictory relationship between the material plenitude of global capitalism and the starving multitudes that rely on its energy, the Dutch artist Melanie Bonajo brings this dilemma to the scale of the individual body in its relationship to consumer products. Her works frequently stage her body in tension with household objects in domestic scenarios. So Bonajo describes her household furniture as a condensation of material energy, speculating how long she could live off that energy, and describing how she dreams of burning everything she has. So her photograph series imagine this cathartic fantasy of escaping the capitalist grid, but they also invoke a palpable sense of suffering and self-destruction, as though to sacrifice oneself would be a kind of autopoietic response to the perpetuation of the economic system that absorbs the energy of bodies through their own processes of self-impoverishment. So we can consider this one afterlife against the world. A woman lies on a layer of toilet paper rolls decorated by birthday candles and lipsticks on top of her kitchen counter. Her surface morphology is remolded by a layer of ambiguous substance that looks like clay but stands in as icing, given the positioning of the candles on top. The fridge below is conspicuously open so that one can scan the food inside. The woman could be read as a redistributed and feminized version of Hirschhorn's big cake. Bonajo presents an ambivalent scene of a body regulated between capitalist plenitude, that is, she recreates herself as a cake. We can even see the flour on the floor as evidence of this process. And physical powerlessness. She is naked, smothered by inert substance, lit up, but lying down and caught in an axis of shelving supports, each placed like a geometric compass in a play on Leonardo's Vitruvian Man. She therefore articulates the constricted dilemma of symbiosis with an always hungry and expanding energy system. The woman does not sit down and eat the food in her fridge, but is instead delivered up on the counter as an energy reserve in her own right. Bonagio's mobilization of the body as an object to be consumed and its positioning in relation to furniture and other commodities calls to mind Graham Harman's provocative account of tool being. Harman argues that the world is an empire of equipment, and that existence or being is not an exclusively human experience, but is integral to a broader tool being. He writes, "Every being is entirely absorbed into this world system, assigned to further possibilities in such a way that there could never be any singular endpoint within the contexture of reference. In this strict sense, the world has no parts. Beings are not only tool beings in some limited private way, rather they should be utterly swallowed up into a single system of tool being, a total empire of equipment." Bonagio exposes this adjoinment and co-implication of body and furniture in an energy system that provokes the desire to expend oneself into and as an integral part of the global equipment of that system. So I'll conclude with this image. The conjunction between the global economy, its appropriative energy system, and its internalization of waste takes on a geological scale when understood in relation to climate change. Tara Donovan's landscapes of styrofoam and plastic objects speak to this new register of the industrial resource economy. Donovan recapitulates the restriction of the closed resource system and the impossibility of regeneration, with a particular focus on petrochemical materials, such as plastics and other polymers, which irrevocably displace the elemental substance of the planet itself in her work. So in this one, Untitled Plastic Cups, this is a vision, we could say, of anthropogenic change in which thousands of plastic cups stacked at different levels create the illusion of a glacial topography of undulating snowbanks. The installation takes the viewer from the scale of an individual object, the single plastic cup, to the phenomenon of global warming through its strong visual associations with Arctic landscapes and glacial melt. More strongly, it's haunted by the concept of the capitalocene, Jason Moore and Donna Haraway's elaboration of the geological epoch of the Anthropocene. The planetary impact of the capitalocene becomes measurable and visualizable through the specific forms of waste that the system produces. Specifically, it has a flat organismic toll. Species and biotic life, human energy slaves, whole nations, human civilization itself are evident only in the multitudes of plastic cups, a veritable graveyard of consumer products. Despite the impressive number of cups and their plenitude as a totality, they're all empty, with no possibility of ever being used for their original function, just being filled to drink from. The technological sophistication of the disposable plastic cup has become a scene of dysfunctionality, in which the unemployed products are frozen in a standing reserve of organized but useless human garbage. The installation encompasses the endpoint after the biosphere and technosphere have co-ingested one another, producing a figuration of emptiness, lifelessness, and entropy. So the artists considered here advance a critical visuality insofar as they articulate forms of connection between unacknowledged or invisible waste and the system that produces them. They expose and elaborate the coextensiveness of human and ecological wasting with the system's diminishing energy levels. More importantly, their works force us to consider waste more broadly, not as merely systemic pollution, but in energetic terms as well. Both human and biological life become energy resources for the economy and the spoilage of that system. In that case, we must ask what the axiological underpinnings of zero waste are and what they must become in order to address the real ecology of waste. Thank you. I'll stop there.